Okay, Valerio, I'm providing the sign for that. Okay.
Okay, so I assume
you can start, Valerio.
Very good. Who do we have the pleasure of talking to? Corrado, can you give me a quick introduction to the community?
Okay, good. Okay, actually in this event we are having two different communities that we are managing here in London. The first one is Lean Agile Delivery Coaching Network. Then there is also Digital Transformation in London. So people is coming from the different communities. Okay, why two different communities? But probably you know, very often people that is involved in a digital transformation very often is using Agile to make this change. Okay, and again, very often people that is playing with Agile are doing this during and to do a digital transformation. So we think that there is a very strong connection with that. And we think that there are some, how can I say, synergies between capacity and knowledge coming from digital and coming from Agile. And we want to share this with, let me say, a single community that has people coming from the different approach. Okay, so that's why different communities. And however, we are arranging a topic on digital and Agile. We try to connect. For example, we had topic about artificial intelligence in the last month. Okay, and also in tooling for make people collaborating. Okay, so really digital. And instead, a topic like this one that is, let me say, more on product management, but really more close to Agile, but can be applied very easily also to digital product. Okay, particularly I think that this is on digital product. For example, next event will be with Josh Sander, that is the author, another author of book about outcome and output. So he wrote this book in this spring, and his talk will be focused on some of the concepts described in the book. Again, is this Lean Agile? Is this digital? Well, probably both. Okay, so this is a perfect combination. Actually, this month we have an event every week, and on 4 weeks in September, we are going to have 3 different events on product management. So you will be the first one, and then we have Josh, and then we have another event at the end of the month on product management, particularly on OKR. Okay, again, is this a digital topic? Is this a Lean Agile topic? Yeah, probably both. Okay, so this is the spirit, the mission of the community.
Awesome, thank you. Let me do a screen share here. Let's see if I can share my presentation. Is that coming through?
Yep, I can see that.
Awesome. Okay.
I'm going on mute.
That's great. All right. Good afternoon, I believe, right? In the UK. Yes. My name is Valerio Zanini. I'm Italian, as you probably can hear. But I've been in the United States since 2004. And I am a certified Scrum trainer with the Scrum Alliance. I am a product manager by experience, and I am a product manager trainer by work. That's what I do. I teach and train agile and product management practices. And today I would like to share a couple of stories from my real life experience to get you started, to get you thinking about some challenges that product managers face as they work with agile teams in general. And let me start by asking you a question. Who likes tiramisu?
Yes.
Very nice, very nice. All right, so we're gonna talk about tiramisu as well today. So this is me. I've been working across large companies and the small companies. I started a startup in the US in 2006. I worked for a major bank, Capital One. And most recently, for the last 3 years, I've been running my own company, which is a consulting and training company, as I said, in product innovation, agile, and design thinking. I'm also the author of a book called Deliver Great Products That Customers Love. And it's about a book on product management, where I talk about the different challenges and different practices and techniques that product managers can use to be effective in their job. So let me ask you a question. Can you build a cathedral using Agile?
Okay, just a point, Valerio. Do you prefer that we are jumping in the conversation, or maybe we can use the chat to write our interaction?
We can also use the chat. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I don't mind the conversation. But anyway, this question in particular was more like a provoking question to get you thinking. And I'm gonna move on to my story. And the story begins in Italy, in Rome, in 1546. That's the year when the Pope wanted to build St. Peter's, which everybody knows is the largest cathedral in the world. And of course, building a cathedral is a big job, right? It's a big effort. In fact, it took hundreds of years. It usually takes hundreds of years to build a cathedral. The Sagrada Familia is still in construction in Barcelona, for example. Anyway, St. Peter's, for 40 years, they have searched for the perfect design. The Pope hired and fired 7 different architects, each one proposing different design, different layouts, but no one really hitting it right away with the Pope. Until the last one, called Antonio da Sangallo, also called the Young, had a very different idea. He said, "Hey, Pope, let me build a big wooden prototype." And it took Sangallo, it took him 7 years to do this. And the purpose here was so I can refine, really write down basically all the requirements for this church. Think of this as a big product requirement document. That's what we will do today, writing down all the requirements. Instead of writing down, he basically built them in wood in this prototype. After 7 years, the wooden model was not yet finished, and the Pope was really counting down his time. He said, "You know, I cannot wait anymore here." So he went to Antonio Sangallo and said, "You know, Antonio, no more waterfall. We need to do something different here. It's time to move on, start deliver value to these poor Christians. We need a cathedral. We need to start building something here." So he fired Antonio Sangallo and instead hired somebody who already had a reputation for innovation, and it was Michelangelo. Michelangelo already had done amazing work, and in particular, he had read the book from Eric Ries, The Lean Startup. So was very familiar with the learn, build, measure cycle. And in fact, he proposed to do something similar. He said, "I'm going to use a 7-day cycle where I'm going to build a clay prototype of one idea. I'm going to get feedback from the Pope, and then based on the feedback, I'm going to pivot and continue." And that's what he did throughout the construction of St. Peter's. He basically worked on 7 days iterations. Every iteration building a little bit of the cathedral, creating clay prototypes for the next iteration, and getting feedback from the Pope. And whenever things were not right, like for example, maybe a window was too small or too big and whatnot, he would just take it down. He would take down that section of the cathedral and rebuild it and iterate on that. So for example, still today, we don't have any overall plans for St. Peter's because Michelangelo did not make them. It just built in iterations for whatever could be built shortly, and then iterated that based on feedback. So let me ask you the question again. What do you think? Was Michelangelo the first agilist 500 years ago? And again, that's a provoking question, right, to get you thinking. But if you think about the clay prototypes, the same technique is still used today. Like car automakers use that to create, to visualize a model before they actually build anything with the production, with the manufacturing process. This is an example from Alfa Romeo, for example. So now I want to start thinking about the primary responsibilities of a product manager, thinking about that learn, build, measure cycle. How does this cycle represent, how does it transform into the primary responsibilities of a product manager? And I think there are three primary responsibilities. The first one is understand the customer. The second one is drive product development. And third one is measure the outcomes. And they should ideally be in balance with each other. So let me, before we move on and talk more about this, let me ask you a question. On which of the three areas are you more focused? The understanding the customer, the drive product development, or measure the outcomes? And I invite you to write your answer in the Zoom chat. I should be able to see that. Let's see if I can. There we go. I see a lot of people, customer and measuring outcomes, customer measuring outcomes. That's awesome. That's great. Okay. Great. So let's talk more about this. But before we do that, I want to talk about the tiramisu. After all, we are all here for that, right? We are here for the tiramisu. Okay, so the tiramisu, to make a good tiramisu is actually not that easy. And the reason is that there are three main ingredients in a tiramisu. One is coffee, in particular espresso. The second one is the lady fingers or Savoiardi cookies. The third one is the mascarpone cheese. Now, to make a good tiramisu, these three ingredients need to be somehow in balance. If they are not, you may end up with possible outcomes like this. So this is sticky that my daughter created as I was preparing this presentation. If it is too much mascarpone, then you get a mushy cake. Too much coffee, soggy, or too much cookie, then it's dry. And I would say the same thing happens with the product manager. You have these three main responsibilities. And when you focus too much on one and disregard the others, you may end up with something that is dry or mushy or these kind of things. In particular, I see very often the product managers and teams in general, they focus a lot on driving product development. So they may do some activities with the customers at the beginning to understand their needs, their problem, their space. They quickly jump into making a plan and then creating a product. And they spend most of the time actually working with the team and driving product development. And then maybe at some time, maybe usually at the end, they figure out they need to measure the outcomes. So they stop what they're doing and they start scramble to measure some outcomes and validate they have done the right thing. This even gets worse because when you ask people, oh, but we are agile, we do the product development, we use agile. We may use Scrum or not during the product development. And I'm going to share a story on that soon. Before we do that, I would like to share this. How do we know when we are focusing on the right things and when our people they have the right expertise, the right skill set to spend the right time? So we have created, in collaboration with this company called Comparative Agility, we have created an assessment on product management and innovation. They are the leader in agile assessments, and they have added this to their repertoire to help anyone, could be individual people, could be teams or entire organizations, understand where they focus more and where they maybe lack some expertise or skill set, so they can identify areas for improvement in product management and innovation. The other thing I would like to share is this concept of the 5 dimensions of great products. So every product goes through these 5 dimensions. There is a discover dimension where we understand the problem and needs and opportunities with our customers in the market. Then we design solutions, we develop the product, we deploy that in the market, and then we deliver value. We measure the outcomes, and we make sure that there is a customer adoption. Now, what often happens is that we measure value only at the very end. We wait for a product to be available and ready in the market to measure the value that we deliver. Instead, we should treat these 5 dimensions as rapid cycles of rapid iterations and really measure value to the customer all the way. So even during discovery or even during design, we can validate if what we are understanding, what we are thinking are the right solutions for our customers or not, if they deliver value or not. One way to think about this is this. So we can create, for example, an MVP, go through the 5 dimensions rather quickly, create an MVP, deploy that in market, deliver value, measure that outcomes, and then plan the next iterations and so on. All of these really helping to minimize the risk that we are building the wrong thing. If you are interested in looking at the 5 dimensions, you can actually download this from the website. This is the 5-dimension canvas, where for each dimension we have listed the typical tools or practices that you can apply and use to support you at each of those steps. So if you can take a screenshot or use the QR code to visit the website and download it. And then a question for you, looking at this 5-dimension canvas and looking at your work and where you normally practice, which of the 5 dimensions are you more focused and which are you weaker? Which one would you need some help with? So you can put that in the chat. On which of the 5 dimensions you more focused, which one is weaker? We can see a few answers here with develop, focus on development, focus on discover. Yeah. Evaluate value. Awesome. Very good. Very good. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. Okay, and we use this 5-dimension canvas to help individual program managers and teams to assess which dimension they typically are stronger and which dimension typically they may need some help with, so we can help them in developing the expertise and the skill set they need in these practices to help get stronger in every dimension. And yes, Mary, thank you for stating that. A good balance is needed for quick iteration. Yes, a good balance across all the 5 dimensions. Thank you. All right, so this was the question. Let me share a story. And this is a story of 2 teams. This is a real life story from my times back in the bank. I mentioned it earlier. At some point, there were 2 business units, 2 different business units, which decided to rewrite an old legacy system, old legacy application, rewrite that using a more modern architecture built on a CRM application, in particular Salesforce. These 2 business units had the same need. They were serving different type of customers, but basically they had the same need. And each one of the 2 business units decided to take on this project independently. So this is a story of how one business unit fared well against the other. So I will call the first one Team 1, which is the other business unit. And one quote to them is, "Of course we are agile. We use Scrum in development." Now let's look how this look like in practice. So because they had to rewrite this legacy application using the new modern technology, they basically spent 6 months looking at the old legacy application and writing down all the requirements. They made a list of all the things that the old legacy application did. And they created this long list of requirements for the new one. Once they were done with all that gigantic list, they requested approval, they got approval, and then they went to the development team. And the development team was an agile team. They used Scrum. And they said to the development team, "Hey team, this is the list of requirements, and you have 1 year to build it. Can you do that?" And the development team looked at that and said, "Yeah, of course we can do that." And so they started breaking down the work into 2-week sprints and sprint after sprint, working on the list. Guess what is happening at the end of the year? Guess where this is going? This was a big upfront planning project with no room for adapting to change, no room for discovery, because all the requirements were being set upfront. And as they were doing the work, they actually discovered some of the things they were asked to be doing, they were too difficult. They could not be done. We missed the data. There were a lot of unexpected things. And so when the year came, only 50% of the application actually had been built. And because not the whole thing was ready, they could not get rid of the old legacy application. They could not deploy the new one. Basically, they had spent 1.5 years by now, and they have nothing that they could use in market with any user. They need at least 1 more year to finish the work before they could use it. The story did not end very well for Team 1. In fact, a lot of people got fired because of this. Now, so let's look at Team 2. That was my team. And our quote is, "I don't know what I don't know." The reason is none of us had ever worked on either the legacy application nor on Salesforce. So we really didn't know what we didn't know. But one thing we knew was this. There was no purpose in doing big upfront planning and trying to figure out all the requirements upfront. We said, let's do things in quick, rapid iterations, and let's figure out what we can prioritize that drives the most value First, we build that and we validate if we are on the right track or not, and then we adapt our plan. And so we started with discovery. And in fact, we spent a few weeks doing empathy interviews, observations, and prototype testing. With whom? With the actual people that use the application. So instead of saying, we have all this legacy application, let's rebuild the same thing using the new technology, we ask ourselves, what do the people need to do with that old application? Maybe there are even things that the old application doesn't do, and we can build the new things. So we interviewed all the bankers and the customers and really learning from them what they needed the application to do and what kind of problems they wanted to solve. Then we went into design and we said, okay, let's brainstorm a few different solutions here. So we did a design sprint, for example. During 1 week, we went from a problem statement to a few prototypes that we validated with our customers, and we got feedback from them. We use storyboards. You can see a couple of pictures here, where we use the storyboards to really ideate a bunch of different solutions. We didn't know which one was the right one. So we built some prototypes and we again validated with the customers. We invited the customers to come to our office, and if we couldn't, we would go to them. And we did the prototype testing early on in development to really measure value and trying to understand what we could build that was valuable for them. We built a product journey map. Product journey map, for those of you who don't know the tool, it's an awesome tool to create transparency around the overall plan and also define what is going to be in the MVP. So at the top, you see all the different steps in the journey that the customers take through the application. And then under each step, all the different features that we want to build. And then the blue lines separate the MVP from version 2.0, versions 2.1, and so on. And so we really decided, okay, we want to deliver this value first. What are the features that we want to deliver? And who are the personas, and so on. So we created this huge map on the wall. You can see the whole wall here. And we actually held every single meeting with our customers, with the team, and with the stakeholders in their room, so that everybody would have the plan right in front of them. It would be very easy to make trade-off decisions. So once all of that was done, it really took only maybe a month or two to do that, we started developing. But instead of developing the whole thing, we also said, what's the minimum that we can build? And how can we validate that quickly? And we kept doing things in rapid iterations, validating what we built with the bankers, with our customers, and really iterating on that as quick as possible. So finally, we were able to deploy an MVP in market in 4.5 months. In 4.5 months, we were in market with a set of bankers actually using our tool with customers, with real customers, and collecting data and giving us feedback. And of course, it was not the whole tool. It was actually doing only one thing, only one minor thing, but it did it. And for us, proved the key hypothesis that we had made about this product, proved that there was value in building this tool. And because of that, we were able to raise additional budget and then hire new people, extend the team, and keep working on that. The end of the story is that a couple of years later, this application was presented at Dreamforce, which is the annual Salesforce conference in San Francisco. It was presented as the largest Salesforce implementation in the banking industry to date at the time. So it means that you can build something that is very big and very valuable even if you work in small iterations. You don't need to build everything up front. Then we had to measure value. And so we used a few criteria, and in particular, a couple of things. We started asking the question, are the bankers actually using it? And for that, we started looking at a couple of things. One was a couple of metrics. One was the number of customer profiles entered and the number of customer profiles updated on subsequent visits. This was something that the old legacy application was not able to do. And our hypothesis was that this was probably the most valuable thing that our bankers and customers needed. So we built that first, and we measured the metrics around that. And we got awesome feedback actually out of that. And then, do customers even like it? So we started collecting customer feedback using different metrics there. Customer interviews, banker interviews as proxies, or even the NPS measurement from the bank. So what are the lessons learned in this story? The first one is, of course, the tiramisu. Everybody needs a good tiramisu to make good work. The second one is that in order to be successful and deliver a successful product, we need to keep in balance the three main responsibilities: understanding the customers, drive product development, and measure the outcomes. And yes, we can use Scrum in this, but Scrum is not about just executing the product development piece. We can embed understanding the customer, measure the outcomes within the Scrum sprint. So that every sprint we can do that. Every single iteration we can do this cycle and really be able to build incrementally and minimize the risk of building the wrong thing. When we plan the work across the 5 dimensions, we can plan the work into small releases, thinking about versions, the MVP, for example, version 2.0, 2.1, and so on, and really deliver value as quick as possible, measuring value along the way, and then building in increments. Now, one other thing that I want to share is, as part of our job, we have created a training program in product innovation and customer discovery, where we bring a lot of these practices, a lot of these tools, a lot of these stories to life for the participants. In particular, we have 2 programs. One is a Certified Product Innovation Professional, which is a certified class from Spark Engine, CPIP. And we also have a shorter workshop for advanced user story writing and splitting. So for anyone who may be interested, here is a coupon code that you can use for a discount. So if you want, please take a screenshot of this page and you can say that. And then finally, I'd be happy to stay connected with you all. So here are my contact information on Twitter and LinkedIn, my email, and also a link to the book if you're interested in learning more. And with that, Corrado, I'm happy to take any questions or have a discussion on this.
Well, Valerio, I really enjoyed that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Just a question for me about the discount code. Can we add the discount code in the meetup page so everyone can join that? I will do. Okay, if eventually.
Sure. Okay. You want to put the link also to sparkengine.com?
Yeah. I can copy this. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, I start breaking the ice. Okay, can you go for 1 second to your model of the 3 dimension? Because I was curious. You mentioned the case. Yeah, this one. Yeah, perfect. You mentioned the case where the product owner is really focused on product development and not on the other situation. Did you experience, given your examples, also the case where, for example, the product owner was too focused on understand the customer or too focused on measure the outcomes?
Yes, I would say that usually, typically what I see is that measuring the outcomes is not a strong focus. Typically that comes out as an afterthought rather than really being something that we do continuously throughout the development process. I've seen many product owners being too focused on the customer piece and not really working with the development team in driving product development. Usually this is the case if you look at Scrum, for example, where the product owner does not behave as a member of the Scrum team, but they behave as an external stakeholder. They may show up at sprint planning, they may show up at sprint review, but they are completely non-existent in between the sprint. And that, of course, leaves the team in the blank throughout the sprint, and the only thing they can rely on is any documentation or any detailed requirement that the product owner may have written in the user stories and so on, rather than having really a collaboration with the product owner and working together on the development.
Thank you, Valerio. Any more questions? Because I have another one, but I don't want to take over the meeting. Please be brave.
This is Nadeem here.
Perfect. Go ahead. We can hear you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. It was fantastic. My first question is, my only question really is, the team one seemed very flawed. It was producing the duplication of legacy functionality. And I don't normally see that when I do implementations myself. There is a genuine need to improve the customer experience, but still within waterfall. So I think their remit was very flawed. Would you agree?
There were several flaws in that approach. Yes, one was I don't think that just the idea of taking an old legacy application and rebuild it in a new system, a new platform was a flaw by itself. That's not the case. Is how they went about it that was flawed. And instead of, again, taking the time and taking the opportunity to really discover what was valuable and what maybe what not in the old application and rebuilding the things that were valuable, and instead they went off by doing a big upfront planning. They started with this huge list of requirements without any validation that some of them were even valuable or not. They just had these long list of requirements. There was no validation whatsoever with the customer, I mean. And they built the whole thing. And because their goal was to build the whole thing, they, at any point in the process, they did not have anything that was working that could deliver value to the customer. So if you had to take whatever was available 6 months down the road, they could not take it and deploy that to the customer and validate that, because they are all bits and pieces here and there. So it was all or nothing. So huge risk, because if you build the wrong thing, you have invested 2 years or more, huge cost into doing that. And I see this all the time. 6 months ago, I was working with another bank, and they were building an MVP. And to build that MVP, they had spent 6 months to make a big upfront plan, listed all the requirements, and they set a deadline a year later to launch this MVP. And they called it our MVP because there was their first release. But still was a big upfront planning without any validation in between. Even a sprint, they did a sprint review, But the sprint review was more like a presentation of what the team had done without really asking any feedback from customers in terms of validating the work and looking if what was next was still valuable or not.
It's usual, yeah. It's usual to have the requirements signed off by the customer, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think there's nothing wrong. But would you think that the customer knows everything about your requirements up front?
They don't know enough. Is what you're saying?
Yeah, typically they don't, right? So the point is, when you have a backlog, of 1,000 different things you want to build. If you treat that backlog as a list of requirements, meaning every single thing is required, otherwise we cannot build this, it's a very different thing that if you treat your backlog as a list of experiments. Each product backlog item could be an experiment. Let's say this is the most valuable thing that we think about doing. Let's validate. Maybe let's build it. Let's put it in the hands of customers and validate it. Get feedback from your customers. And maybe that changes the whole rest of the backlog, because now you learn something else is actually more valuable than everything else. Is the point of making all the requirements upfront rather than discovering their value along the way.
Yes, I understand. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Welcome.
I have a question, if that's okay.
Sure, go ahead, Mary, go ahead.
Yeah, obviously, to get your features quickly into the market, we're talking about having an end-to-end feature team, right? And we also know that, I mean, feature teams are great, but they also have their advantages and disadvantages. And you would also have times when having a component team has its own advantages as well. So what has been the challenges you have faced in terms of, you know, is it a component team, is it a feature team, or should it be a mixture of both?
So I'll give you two answers to that question. The first one is that if you are in a context of having strong dependencies between teams, like your case will be a component team, you may want to create strong transparency and collaboration between the teams. So for example, planning together, attending each other's sprint review, doing refinement of the backlog together, at least cross-pollinate each other's backlog, so that we can really remove those dependencies or plan around the dependencies as much as possible. We move as a unit rather than individual parts. That's what typically you may want to do with when you have a component team. Now, the second answer is, if you can avoid the component team altogether, even better. Because ideally, you may want to have a team, a small team, that is able to deliver value end to end. And I'll give you a quick story. About a year ago, I was asked to go and help a large product team. They were on sprint 26. So sprint 26, 2-week sprints, is basically a year into the work. And they, at that point, they had 0 product increment to demo. Nothing that was working that they could show to stakeholders. So imagine the outlay of cash, just the cost of that. Anyway, when I started looking at the problems, there were several problems, by the way. One of them was that the way the work was constructed, there was the need for some business analysis, understanding of the requirements and different pieces of that application up front. Then somebody had to pull a bunch of data from a data repository, actually multiple data repositories, make this data available. Then somebody had to build visualizations for those data, and then finally somebody else would have to connect the visualization to the actual data sources to deploy that tool in production. Each one of these was a component team. And when you look at the flow work, it was a huge, gigantic waterfall process. Nothing would happen on team 2 until team 1 had finished their analysis. Nothing would happen on team 3 until team 2 had finished their work, and so on. So you had the huge dependency between these teams, and flow was always blocked. Huge delays, huge dependencies, and these kind of things. And one thing that we recommended doing was to reshuffle the teams and create cross-functional teams. So instead of 4 individual component teams, we created 4 feature teams. And each team had somebody doing business analysis, somebody doing data analysis, somebody doing the front end. You get the point, right? All the skill sets were within the team, and they would only work on a small chunk of work. Instead of a big feature, they would only work on a smaller chunk of work and be able to deliver that in a sprint. And by doing that, in a couple of sprints, we actually had a working increment that we were able to demo to the stakeholders. So how you structure the teams can have actually a big impact on the productivity of the team.
Thank you very much for that answer. But is there any point where you will be at an advantage to use a component team if there's no need for a quick feedback anymore when the product is stable?
The advantage of the component team is skill set, expertise. They may be very strong, very good at building on an API, for example, and that's their advantage. The suggestion is when you have components team, really strive to create transparency and collaboration with teams. So collaborative planning, collaborative road mapping. If you're doing safe PI planning, so make sure that these are all practices that you can adopt to create transparency and collaboration so that the plans are aligned and they can work out the dependencies. They can align the dependencies between them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. Any more questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a quick follow-up. So thanks for the talk. It was really nice to and I guess where I'm currently sitting is in a kind of network and infrastructure, which is becoming quite challenging to get rid of those kind of component teams versus like T-shaped teams. And because of how the organization is structured currently, although we know we have to be at the position where we have the cross skills teams across the stack, we are still kind of, you know, in a smaller component teams. So in your experience, do you have any good example of how to make it more efficient for this specific, like, you know, network and infrastructure teams to be more agile, because it's becoming a challenge?
One typical challenge that I see in this type of teams is the ability to plan the work, or actually to be able to be responsive to the work. Because often you may not be able to know what work is showing up tomorrow, but you need to have the capacity to be able to support whatever requests are coming up tomorrow. So it's very difficult to do that with Scrum. And Kanban is often a better way to go. Are you using Scrum, Kanban? What are you?
Yeah, kind of using combination. So the decision was made by organization to go Scrum against all the advice to go Kanban. So we try to compromise on a kind of Scrumban, but it's mostly Scrum.
Okay. I totally get it. Yeah. So a couple of suggestions in that environment would be, one is plan your sprint at very low capacity. So you don't want to plan your sprint at whatever capacity you have, because then you don't have room for anything else that shows up unexpectedly. But instead you want to plan, I don't know, I actually don't know what the right number is because it depends on your situation, but you may want to say, we plan at 40%. The remaining 60 is responsive capacity. So you basically do capacity allocation for your team. And 40% is the work that we can plan, that we know is in the backlog, and we can prioritize that. 60% is responsive work that will show up, and we need to support that, whatever is coming up, and so on. It could be 10% and 90%. I don't know what the right number is. It depends on the breakdown of your work. But that's one thing to do, capacity allocation. The second thing is, you probably are doing that already since you're doing Scrum, is within a sprint, use a Kanban board to visualize the flow of the work. You may have already expedite rows for priority work and these kind of things. So you can more properly visualize the work that everybody is doing during the sprint, and in particular, the responsive work that may show up during the sprint.
Oh, that's very useful. Thank you.
Were you doing already any one of those?
We were not running low capacity, but we did do the Kanban visualization and the different swim lanes for priority work and so on.
Got it. Okay.
Well, just to add a contribution to the conversation, just last week I had a talk with a Scrum at Scale guru, and he mentioned a practice that is interrupt buffer. Interrupt buffer is exactly what you were saying, Valerio. You make a statistical analysis of how many interrupts you receive during the sprint, and then you take the decision to reserve a section, part of the capacity for this interruption. This is the interrupt. Just to give the reference of the name of the practice. That was the right one. Okay. I have a problem. My last question is about stakeholder management. In your scenario, let me say you are lucky because you have the opportunity to talk directly with your customer or maybe your users. But in my scenario, for example, I'm working in a large bank too. It's not so common to interact with our customers. So we have, let me say, stakeholders that actually interpret the customer needs. So how is stakeholder management in the schema that you described?
Let me see if I understand the question. So how can we support and create transparency with stakeholders while we manage the three responsibilities?
Yeah. Go ahead, please. Yes.
Okay. Great. So let's see. Actually, I like a few tools that help in doing that. So first of all, in general, it's about creating transparency. Transparency happens in many ways. One is to make your backlog transparent, and being transparent on the priorities. We want the product owner, product manager to be empowered by the organization, but that empowerment also comes with the responsibility of sharing and making things that are transparent. The other way is to invite and make sure that they attend the sprint review. Oftentimes, we treat the sprint review as just a demo where we present things, we present the work we have done, rather than really engaging the stakeholders and the customers in trying out the product and giving us feedback. And that process of engaging them and giving us feedback is actually can be very powerful. Can be very powerful because it can only validate the work that we have done in the sprint, but can also validate, or maybe not, The backlog, what is coming up next? We spoke earlier about not treating the backlog as one list of requirements, but maybe a list of experiments. So we can iterate on that and change things and so on. If you are getting feedback from the stakeholders, a sprint review on the backlog itself. So we can actually present the backlog and say, hey, stakeholders, this is our backlog. Are these the next important priorities for you or not? What should we be working on in the next sprint? That's a great way to get them to participate in the development process every single sprint. And then there are tools like I shared the product journey map. Another one is the roadmap. These tools, when done collaboratively with the stakeholders, for example, in a big room on a wall, like I showed the picture, or using Miro or Mural as a collaboration tool, they can be great tools to create transparency between the development team and the stakeholders and alignment, again, on the priorities. So we are on the same page, and we are monitoring the progress of the work, and same page on the priorities.
Thank you, Valerio.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there more questions for Valerio? Okay. So I think we can close this session. Thank you very much, Valerio, for this sharing. I found really helpful. And okay, we will keep in touch for sure, because we have another event that we know. But however, we will provide the references for the book and for the training that Valerio has anticipated now. Okay.
Thanks a lot for the time today. It was a pleasure speaking with all of you. Please connect with me. I'm happy to stay in contact. Any other questions, happy to connect and share.
Great talk. Thank you very much for sharing. Thank you all for joining. Just a quick reminder for next week's session about outcome and output. Valerio, you are invited if you want. Probably you know something about that, but obviously you can be part of the community now. Okay. Thank you again, Valerio.
Thank you.
Have a great day. And thank you for your awakening. I mean, it's not easy. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.